Hello and welcome. Today we're gonna talk about dopamine fasting. So what do we mean by dopamine fasting? And before that we're gonna have some coffee, because coffee increases dopamine levels. Dopamine is a complex molecule secreted by the synapses in the brain. So it's a complex because there is a habituation when it is secreted for many times for prolonged periods. The receptor becomes saturated and then it becomes downgraded, so it will be less receptors and then less availability of the neurotransmitter to transmit the synaptic impulse. So when you watch too much R-rated content, your brain becomes numb to the stimulation. So the more you stimulate, the less you get, and then after a while you feel depressed, or you feel lack of motivation, or what we call it anhedonia. Self-reflection and practice of meditation will help in regulating your dopamine levels. Also, other than that, exercise regularly will increase your dopamine level. Caffeine will increase the dopamine levels. So many ways to counteract this fluctuation of dopamine. It is worth mentioning that dopamine is not only the only neurotransmitter in the brain. There are many others, and serotonin, glutamate are also linked to other disorders, and their treatment also differs. So if you have any medical condition, never forget to consult a psychiatrist or a specialized person, and these limited conditions which limits your ability to focus or to interact with others, or limit your daily activities, especially your daily work or daily exercise, or your life in general. Here is the dopamine schematic representation of the presynaptic and postsynaptic neurons, and on each postsynaptic neuron you have a receptor for dopamine. These receptors receives the granules of dopamine from the presynaptic location into the postsynaptic, or in the synapse, and then it facilitates the conversion of ATP, so the producing of the signaling pathway in the brain. So in generally speaking, when you have a disease or a medical condition, you have less of these receptors, these green ones, and you have less of a transmission of a neural signals. So what happens to these receptors when you watch too much content of our content? You have a habituation, you have less of these receptors, and less and less with time you get a habituation in your mesolimbic pathway, and you need more to stimulate. And this is the location, or this is the basic of neural signaling, and the basic pathway that we are targeting by dopamine fasting or dopamine detoxification. Of course, there are many other schematic representations of the dopamine signaling pathway in the brain, but this is the main idea. You get energy, you get lack of energy depending on your dopamine levels and dopamine consumption and dopamine habituation, which results in reducing the receptors in the postsynaptic membranes. So this is, in generally speaking, the way to counteract, to control, to detox your brain. Many of the studies were done on the dopamine receptors and the process and the locations in the brain on rats, and human is totally different. So extrapolating the information from animal world to human world is different than the real life, but the basic principles still apply, which is the consumption, the habituation, and then the need to raise the concentration of dopamine levels in the brain, which results in different disease processes or different diseases. And I mean by that psychosis, depression, or depression and then psychosis, and others. So I hope by this introduction I introduce you to dopamine fasting, detoxification. You can search for it. You will find many resources, many doctors mentioning that process. And by this I conclude my session, and I wish you a nice weekend.